All right, so what we're going to do today is introduce at the most basic level that I can get it, this dependency built on top of Node called Passport. And so just kind of introducing this dependency and a few others that kind of go along with it. And so we have now in our class built our own authentication system, very custom, right? But if there are other packages out there that are common use, I would think that we would learn to use popular packages for authentication and not necessarily just have a homegrown solution. And so the most popular package that exists, to my understanding, is this package called Passport. And just as a fair warning, there is a fair amount of like new code here to this class that we haven't exactly seen before, but I think I can bring it down basic enough that we can get the gist of it. Okay, so we might not understand every line, but I'll do my best to make it understandable to the best of my understanding. Again, I'm relatively new, but I do have a solution here. I'm relatively new to this package, but I do have a solution that brings it down pretty basic. And so pretty cool. So you can kind of see here, Passport, simple, unobtrusive authentication for Node. Okay, it is middleware for Node. Flexible and modular, Passport can be dropped into any Express web app. A comprehensive set of strategies, which is a kind of a term here that they have. They have all these different strategies to support authentication using username and password, Facebook, Twitter, and more. And so you kind of just on their homepage, 500 strategies, and you can kind of see here. Google, OAuth, and so you can kind of click on here, and this is what we will be using now. My kind of history throughout this is I started with the docs, and they have tutorials, and one of them is signing in with Google. But going through this tutorial, you can kind of see the technology stack here. I believe this was not using Mongo. Like in this class, we're using Mongo, and this was using, oh, here it is. You will use SQLite, right? So I didn't exactly love this tutorial because we're doing the MERN stack, and it was not using the database that we used, right? So I was like, well, I didn't love this tutorial for that reason. It was still a decent tutorial to start, but it wasn't, I didn't love it. So that's why I kind of just went outside of their documentation and started just trying to figure this out. So let's go ahead and create, if you're following along, let's just create an empty folder, and we'll just call this Passport Google OAuth. Whatever you call it, not super important. And let's go ahead and open this with Visual Studio Code. Empty folder. And open up our terminal. Of course, you need Node installed so that you can run npm. And let's install some of our basic packages that we're used to. I'm going to install Express. In this class, we've also used debug and the .env and MongoDB driver. And so let's just start with those basic packages. Of course, I skipped a step. I need to do npm init/y. Okay, so now we have a package JSON, and now we can run our install command. and I need to not have a typo in express, E-X-P-R-E-S-S. Okay, so that's going to kind of build in our package JSON to see we've got debug.env, express, and MongoDB. A couple new ones, a couple new dependencies that we have not seen in this class. So let's just go to npm JS. Of course, we're going to bring in Passport. So we were looking at the docs, passport.js.org. You could see about 2 million weekly downloads. So let's go ahead and install Passport. Close package JSON. It's npm I passport. There's also Passport -Google OAuth. And this is the specific strategy within Passport to authenticate with Google using OAuth 2.0 API. Just to kind of Google search OAuth 2.0. OAuth 2.0 is an industry standard protocol for authorization. OAuth 2.0 focuses on client developer simplicity while providing specific authorization flows, web applications, desktop, mobile apps. Okay. So OAuth is a standard protocol for login systems. So we're going to bring in OAuth 20. So we're going to use Passport, and we're going to use Passport with Google. So that's those two packages. And then last but not least, we're going to bring in what's called Express Session. We talked about sessions this last week when we talked about authentication, and basically a session is so that client server can remember themselves. You can have sessions saved on a server, and you can have sessions saved on a client. So this is server-side session management, right? So using Express Session will essentially be creating cookies. And so this will be server-side session storage, right? So that basically client and server can remember each other. Again, lots of weekly downloads. So let's bring in Express-Session. Okay, we've got debug, we've got .env, we've got Express, we've got Express Session, MongoDB, we've got Passport, and Passport Google OAuth. Let's go ahead and go back in here, and let's create a script for start-dev. And just as we have in the past, we're going to make this nodemon with a switch to read our config file, .env-config, and our launching point of our app is going to be, well, we call it index.js or server.js, whatever our starting configuration file will be, or where all of our starting code will land. We just call it index.js. So let's go ahead and create that index.js, and let's make our basic Express server that we have now made a couple times. So in order to do that, we need to import Express from Express. Let's go ahead and make our app. And let's make a home route. And as we do, just to kind of say hello world, and then let's listen on port whatever, 3000. And just maybe do a listening on port 3000. Close that parenthesis. Okay. So since we have NodeMon installed as a global dependency, we should be able to run our script npm run start dev. And okay, it doesn't like our imports because we have to tell package.json to use the newer import syntax, which is type of module. So go ahead and add that type of module. This will allow us to use ES6 modules or ESM modules, which allow us to use this newer syntax of importing. And now you can see we get listening on port 3000. That's cool, except for also I like to create my .env file. And I like to use the debug package. So I'm going to add a debug equals app : star. Bless you. And then let's go ahead and bring in debug, import debug from debug, and then let's make a debugging channel. Const, and I'll call this debug server or debug server. Equals app : server. So now we can replace these console logs with debug server and save that. And now we get a color app : server. I guess you want to make it a little, okay. So now our console logs are a little bit more color coded using this debug package. But that's just Express. That has nothing to do with anything new. We've done that now a couple of times. I also like to make this a clickable link. So instead of just saying listening on port 3000, I'll just do a little we'll just say server started on, and just localhost 3000. Now, since I have a URL, I can control click that, and that should open up with a hello world. And we're off. I'll go ahead and pause, let you guys catch up. Okay, now the new stuff. Let's start bringing in Passport. Import Passport from Passport. We're going to bring in Session from Express Session. So these are new imports. And finally, we're going to import Strategy. And this is a destructured, so it's going in curlies. Import strategy as, and we're just able to name it Google Strategy from Passport Google OAuth. Okay, so these are three new things we haven't seen in this class before. And Passport is a middleware, and we know that we can attach middleware using app.use. So we are now going to configure Passport. We're going to do that by taking this variable that we created, passport.use, Okay. A new Google strategy. Again, that's the variable that we created right here. A new Google strategy. And curlies. Now inside of here, this is an object. It has 3 properties. We have a client ID, and I'll fill this out here in a minute, a client secret, and a callback URL. And I'm going to put this http://localhost, we're on port 3000, /auth Google callback. Okay, now we have to finish this off, and that's why it's crashing. It says OAuth strategy requires a verify callback. So there's more to this here, because this is our first argument. Second argument here is an async. Access token, refresh token, profile, and a method called done. And again, I'll be explaining this as we start using this. Okay, now I should be able to save it. It's got that second argument. Now it's not crashing. Okay, so when we're going to sync up with Google, we need to create, as you often do when you're using another API, you have to create some sort of key, right? You have to go on a website. You have to go on this website. You need to create some sort of key that you can give your software and say, hey, this is this is the account that is associated with my developer, like who I am, my developer account with Google, or my developer account with weather.com, or my developer account with Twitter. Like, you'll create an account as a developer to use their API, so you have a developer account. So you need a client ID. It's essentially your developer ID with Google. Okay, so what you'll do now in this point is you're going to, I'm sure there's different URLs to go to, but the one that we've been using all semester is cloud.google.com. Okay, and this is where you can create this developer client ID. And then you should be logged in here as I am. You're going to click on Council. Okay, and you may have something in here, you may not. Okay, but this APIs and services and credentials, this is where we're going. To create this OAuth client ID, right? Can you guys all see this? I'm gonna delete this. Because I'm assuming you guys do not have, it says no OAuth clients to display. I'm assuming that's what yours looks like. Yeah, I got a couple people shaking their head yes. So I'm going to go ahead and create credentials. And by the way, this is project agnostic. It doesn't care what project you're in. This is just your Google credentials. So I'm going to go ahead and create credentials here. And an OAuth client ID. And this is a web application. And I'm just going to call this Passport OAuth. Yep.
Whenever I hit the OAuth, I got consent screen.
Client ID is used to configure for more information. Okay, go ahead and click on that. And then, so you're at your OAuth consent screen. Choose how you want to configure and register your app, including target users. You can only associate it with one project. Internal, available to users within. You do not need to submit your app. External, available to any user to test with a Google account. Your app will start in testing mode. I didn't go through that the other day, so internal, only available to users within your organization. You will not need to submit your app for verification. Or external, available to any user with a Google account. Well, I mean, available to any test user with a Google account. I would assume, you know, in the real world, I mean, ultimately we want it to be external. So let's click on external. This is always it's a radio button. We could change it later if we need to. Just gotta find it. Okay, so then it says OAuth consent screen. Okay, app name. Let's just fill out what we have to fill out. So app name, just call it Google Passport. So app name, Google Passport. So let's see. Can you just get by with those two pieces of information? Save and continue. Okay, you need your email address. I must have already done that.
I don't know, it just isn't an error.
Here under authorized redirect URIs, I had to add my callback URL. So here, add URL, localhost auth Google callback, add that, and then I click create. This is where I get my client ID, secret, and creation date. Now, a couple students following along had some additional questions to fill out, as if maybe I already did this once, but you're gonna have to fill out whatever the questions may be. You know, it's like some generic app information. Let me pause and see if I can help you fill those out. Okay, so if anyone is doing this today or later, here's a couple students. What they did, they just filled out minimum information. I think example.com was a domain. This is just a test, right? So you fill out your email address, your developer email address. What else did we fill out? Like a name. We made up a name, Passport Demo. And that got us to where you could fill this out, right?
What was the authorized JavaScript origins? What was that?
So at that point, what's the question now? Now we're clicking an OAuth client ID, web application, and then I add an authorized redirect URIs. Let me go back and show you. I did localhost 3000 auth Google callback. That's basically after a successful authentication with Google, like where are they being sent on your web server after that, right? So in other words, you're giving Google control to authenticate the user. They're going to send you back to what URL, and this is the URL that we've specified. Okay, and that is because of this right here. And then you click on save. All right. So now that we've got some client IDs and things of that nature and a secret, we need to save this to our .env. And so let's go back to our env. I'm going to copy my client ID into .env. And I'm going to make a variable called Google _client _ID equals, paste it in. And then I'm going to say Google client secret equals. I'll go back to my client secret right here, copy that, paste that in. So save my client ID and my secret to my .env file. Then I can refactor my index.js to point at them. So this is done by saying process.env.google client ID, comma, and this is process env dot Google client secret. Okay. So we're going to take that's configuring this strategy. The next thing, once we have a user, we're going to save that user info into a server-side cookie. And this is going to be done with this, it's called a serialized user, Passport serialized user. Actually, this is correct. So I'll show you how once a user is logged in, ultimately that information will be saved into a cookie. So this done method is called passing a user and there's also another method to what's called deserialize the user. So this is kind of like writing the user into the cookie. This is reading the user out of the cookie. Okay, so we have these two methods that deal with like saving the user into the cookie and reading the user out of the cookie that are used by Passport. And next we need to set up the session middleware. And this is with app.use. And we call session, which is our variable on line 3, app.use session. It's a method that takes an object and our sessions also have a secret. And so we need to go ahead and maybe define that secret back in our .env. So let's create another variable called session secret. lots of secrets. And I'll put it in a string. I'll just call this super session secret. So we have this session secret on line 4, which will then allow us to use that value in process.env session secret, I believe is what we just called that, session underscore secret. Okay, resave true, save uninitialized to true. And here's when we can set kind of like the cookie. Talk about the max age of a cookie, and if we say 1 hour, right? It's the same math that we did before. 1,000 times 60 times 60. It's kind of the idea of 1 hour is the life of our cookie. Then we're going to set up Passport. So we kind of configured Passport. Now we need to tell it to app.use, Passport initialize, and app.use Passport session. Again, trying to keep this bare bones, but there's quite a bit required to get this up and running. You got to bring in Passport. You have to define what's called this strategy, which is a Google strategy. Obviously, you can use Passport to connect in all sorts of different websites, whatever, Facebook, LinkedIn, etc. So we're saying, hey, we're using Google. Here's our Google information. We'll do some more stuff here in a little bit. When we have a user, we need to save them into a cookie. We need to configure that cookie here and install that middleware, be it Passport initialize and Passport session. Okay, back to our home route. You know, we can do like a little hello, a little H1 here with some instructions. Maybe please navigate to /auth/Google to log in. And so we need to make that route app.get /auth/Google. And so at that route, we run a function called passport.authenticate, authenticate to Google. Scope of profile, not exactly sure what the scope of profile setting does here. But safe to say, we go to this URL, it kind of kicks off the process. Like, it's going to give it to Google to authenticate our user. And then we need to define what happens after. In other words, where do they go? So when Google gives us back, yeah, success or not success, where do we go next? And we said we're going to go to auth Google callback. So let's set up that route, auth Google callback, app.get auth Google callback. Comma, passport.authenticate Google, and And on failure, it's going to redirect to the home page. On failure, redirect home, curly parenthesis, and then on success, comma, I think I got an extra, on success, res. I'm gonna have to fix my arrow, my curlies here. On success, res redirect profile. So we'll go to this profile path, and let me clean up my curly parentheses, semicolon. I might have an extra somewhere. Let me make sure I've got this right. So there was a line 58, there was a parenthesis I deleted. So let's just start from app.get string, comma, passport authenticate. Oh, Google, there's no parenthesis right here. There's no parenthesis after Google. And then that means that there is a parenthesis on line 58. Okay, so if it works, we need to create the slash profile. So we're going to display the user profile. If it ultimately works, app.get slash profile, rec res curlies, if rec is authenticated. So now there's this new method attached to our request. If the request is authenticated, we're going to do a res.send. You are logged in. And in a span tag, let's do backticks here. And we're just going to put a JSON stringify rec.user and null2, that's a little formatting for stringify. Close the span. So if we successfully do this, put the user's information in a span and send that back home. Else, if the user is not authenticated, res redirect home. And let's also make a log out the user. App.get. So a log out path. So we're going to call a rec.logout. And redirect. I'm not sure. I haven't tested that, although that looks pretty simple. We'll see if that logout works. If not, I've got some other code that might work that's a little bit more complex. All right, let's see what breaks. So we are at the point, this is the bare bones code that we can write, that I could write to get this working. So let's go to localhost. Okay, please navigate to /auth/Google to log in. Well, that's a good sign. It took us to a standard accounts.google.com. So let me just sign in with my normal Gmail. Okay, different error. Cannot get auth Google callback. So that to me makes me want to check my route. Auth Google callback, cannot get auth Google callback. Okay, let's troubleshoot this. So I do see one thing that I left off. I'm not, this probably is something, because I was gonna wait to write this later, but let's back up here, because, okay, this is in my Google strategy. So scroll up to Google strategy in this async function. Let's return done null profile. That return statement probably, I was gonna wait to write that later, but I think that's going to be needed. So let me npm run start dev 3000. We're cooking. Auth Google. Aha, we are logged in with a bunch of information, including my Google account name. You really don't get a lot of information out of this. You get someone's name and you get maybe their picture, right? If I kind of look at that URL of that picture, kind of curious if I copy and paste that. Hey, there's me, circa 2006. But this is cool. Sorry for that, missing that line of code. Let's look at localhost. Let's go to, and now if I just go to /profile, right, you are logged in. Notice if I click on this extension called edit this cookie, you could see that there is a cookie that expires in like an hour, right? This cookie was created on 9/18 and expires 10/18. And if I were to delete this cookie, now this site no longer has a cookie and I'm not logged in, right? So let's re-authenticate with Google. Let's log in. User's logged in, cookie created, cookie sent to the client, so client can see the cookie. Bless you, bless you. And that's cool. Now what can we do from here? Well, you probably want to save this user information to your database, right? To know who's logged into your system. Also, there's no like address information, right? So you might, depending on what you want to do with your user, do I even get an email address? Right? So you might want to collect additional information for use in your system and user statistics and emailing your users and all this kind of stuff. It is pretty basic, and so this is a starting point for getting a user authenticated with another system, but there's probably more that you want to do, and so I'll finish this out and then I'll be done. You guys can get working on some labs. What you could do here, now that we've logged in with Passport, this function right here is where we could take this profile and save it to our database. So as we've done in other we might create a database module and bring in Mongo client. Bring in debug. Make our database variable. Bring in object ID to create new object IDs. Make our little new ID function. Make a connect function, asynchronous. Okay, so we need to make a database URL inside of our .env. So over here, db URL equals, in which case I will go to MongoDB. And I will just make a database for this. So if I go to my cluster, I'll create a database named well, maybe I'm not going to bring this into Retro Amazon yet. So I'll just call this Passport users, or just call it Passport. Passport, collection name, user. So the database is named Passport, the collection is named user. And if I go to connect using MongoDB driver, here is my connection string with my password. So I will save that in my DB URL with my password. And put that in quotes. And my DB name, we called it capital Passport, I think. Okay, Passport. So we have our connection string and we have our DB name, two variables in .env. Okay, DB name, client, await, Mongo client dot connect using connection string underscore DB, client DB, DB name. And then return DB. apparently enough developers are hip to the ping pong joke. Right, so now we can call this ping function, and all we have to do is export ping, and when we import ping over here, that should get us pinging. Import ping from database, and now we're pinging. So back in our database, let's make a function to create a user. Async function create user. We're going to send in a user, really it's the user profile. Connect to our database. Now, of course, our collection is capital U as such. So connect to our database, insert one user, store the result in a variable, return the result. And export those. Okay, so once we have this function to create user, let's write another function to get a user by ID. Async function get user by ID. We pass in an ID. Const db connect. Await the find one. Now, there's a Mongo ID, which is an object ID, but I'll also point out, if I go back to localhost 3000, auth Google, or just profile, I'm not logged in, so /auth /Google, I sign in. There's also an ID that's just a string, right? So this is not an object ID. Right, so I'm just doing a lookup that is a string, that is a Google unique identifier. This is not an object ID unique identifier. So this is to look up by a string ID, so I don't need to convert it to an object ID, and return user. Export that function. So that's all that we're going to do with our database for now. Of course, you know how to expand on that. But just to show you that we can take the user that we get from Google and save it into our database. And then obviously we're not going to save them every time, but we're only going to save them if they don't exist. And so back in index.js, we can kind of come up here. We'll bring in ping. But we'll also bring in get user by ID, and we'll bring in, what do we call it? Save user. We called it create user. And now we just have a simple if-else here. If await get user by ID profile.id. So if the user already exists, we'll say user already exists in database. Else create user sending in the user profile. So now whenever we log in, kind of automatically we'll save the profile information to our database, so we can start to take control of that data. Again, advantages here, letting Google handle credentials is like, now you don't run the risk of your website getting quote unquote hacked, all your credentials leaking, and then you getting sued for not securing your data. Okay, so there is a significant upside of letting someone else handle your authentication. The downside is you can kind of see you're just kind of restricted to, well, we just got we got a username, and we could say, well, they did authenticate with Google, but we don't have any other information, so you don't control the data. So this allowed you to start taking control of some of the data, start saving some information to your database, so that you can use it however you need to. All right, so if we kind of go back here, I never tested my logout. Let's log out. Okay, logout was not well written, so let's flush out logout because I didn't think so. Let's go back to logout. It says it requires a callback function. So inside of logout, in the error case, if there's an error, we'll just send it to the next middleware, return next. Okay. So logout required a callback function, so we put a little callback function inside of logout. So now, if I hit that again, okay, now it does log us out. So /auth/Google, click on that. Okay, I broke it. Let's see what broke. User is not defined. Return user. This is on database right here. Line 36, return result. Okay, there we go. That makes sense. Let's try again. Localhost /auth/Google. Bada bing, bada boom. Okay. Now, okay. And if I go back to my database and I look at Passport, I look at Passport, and I look at user, there I have saved the Google user into my Mongo database. And if I were to log out and authenticate again, we set it up as such that we should not save that data twice. I'm not sure, something might have gone too fast. It did save the data twice, so something's not working. So our get user by ID, we do a find one, return result. Let's do a debug database result.
I found the issue.
What's the issue? Good eye.
Go under, so it's underscore ID and not just ID. So go.
Oh, bingo. String ID versus underscore ID. That's it. Save, refresh. All right, I'll delete this second instance because that was a mistake. If I /log out, yay, /auth/Google, ping it. We're in. Now, user already exists in database. That's what I would expect. And we don't have them saved twice. I go here, go back to here. Ah, wah, wah, wah. Third time's a charm, so let's go back. Almost there. This is finding our user, return result. So I might have to switch the logic. It needs to be if the user is not found or something like that. Let's go up here. I might have this backward. If await get user by ID is truthy, I might have run that function a couple times. Let me try it one more time. It might be working. I might have slash log out. Okay, we're not logged out. If I refresh my collection, we've got one user. Slash auth Google. Log in. I get the user already exists in DB, so that if should be true, so it should not create my user. If else, refresh, 1 of 1. Okay, we're working. Okay, you can kind of see a couple bumps in the road, but ultimately it's working, and we are now authenticating with Google using Passport. So cool stuff. Hope you guys, like the end product, even though we hit a couple bumps. I'm glad we got here.